Listen closely, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a confrontation with what it means to be singled out for the color of your skin in a place where you least expect it. Indigo Williams was an ambitious, driven traveler, poised to take on the skies and her future. But one flight changed everything. Mocked for flying alone, belittled by strangers who assumed she didn't belong in first class, Indigo's dignity was tested at 40,000 feet. She thought she'd stand alone in her fight for respect until a single phone call from the CEO of Delta Airlines turned her world upside down. Indigo Williams sat on the edge of her living room couch, checking her phone for the 15th time that evening. Her flight itinerary stared back at her from the bright screen, Atlanta to Los Angeles, a trip she'd been planning for months. This wasn't just any vacation. It was the first time she would be flying for a crucial job interview with a prestigious technology startup in LA. At 29, Indigo felt like her life was finally coming together. Fresh off earning her MBA, she had worked a series of internships at smaller companies around Atlanta. Now here was the big break, a chance to land a role that could define her entire career. Though Indigo was excited, she couldn't shake a gnawing anxiety, one that had little to do with your standard travel jitters. She had experienced more than her fair share of raised eyebrows at airports. She remembered a time 2 years earlier when she was heading to Boston for a leadership seminar. At the baggage check, the agent asked half-jokingly how she could afford business class. Indigo had laughed it off at the time, but felt the sting of that question long after she'd found her seat on the plane. Now she was flying alone again, determined that nothing would dampen her excitement. She double-checked her passport, even though she was flying domestic. Indigo's personal tradition was to bring her passport to remind herself that the world was wide open and ready for her exploration. She patted the pockets of her jacket, ID, boarding pass, cell phone wallet, everything in place. Her flight was early the next morning. She set her alarm for 5:00 a.m. and forced herself to sleep, though anticipation made rest a challenge. What she didn't know was that this particular journey would be unlike any she'd taken before. By the end of this flight, Indigo's life would shift dramatically. The flight itself would become a dark corridor through which ugly prejudices walked freely, and from which Indigo would emerge stronger, accompanied by unlikely allies. At dawn, Indigo's mother dropped her off at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Before stepping out of the car, Indigo paused to say goodbye. She was an only child, and her mother, Michelle, had raised her single-handedly, working 2 jobs to ensure Indigo could go to college. Her mother's face glowed with pride. "I know you've got this," Michelle said, hugging her. "Show them who you are." Indigo smiled through tears. "I will, Mom." Inside the terminal buzzed with the usual morning rush. People were hurrying to security lines, sipping coffee, pulling suitcases that rattled over the polished floors. Indigo navigated to the Delta Airlines check-in kiosk, entered her confirmation number, and waited for her boarding pass to print. She had decided to splurge on a first-class ticket with money she'd saved from freelance consulting projects. It was a way to arrive in LA fresh and confident. Besides, Indigo believed in rewarding herself for her hard work now and then. And just like that, she was through security, heading for the gate. Though Indigo arrived at her gate with almost an hour to spare, the area was already crowded. She found a seat and pulled out a paperback novel. After a few minutes, she noticed a middle-aged couple across from her casting glances in her direction. At first, Indigo brushed it off as simple curiosity. Then she heard whispering. Even over the hustle and bustle, Indigo caught fragments of their conversation. "Can you believe?" the woman muttered, leaning into her husband's ear. In first class, the man responded, giving Indigo an incredulous look. Indigo's heart pounded annoyance, and a tinge of hurt mingling inside her. It wasn't the first time strangers had made assumptions about her finances or questioned her presence in spaces they thought were exclusive. She told herself she would not engage. As a young black woman, she had practiced the art of ignoring microaggressions her entire life. Instead, Indigo attempted to immerse herself in her novel, hoping the overhead announcement for boarding would come swiftly and provide relief from the tension. When the boarding call for first class finally came, Indigo rose from her seat, determined to walk to the front of the line with dignity. Yet she couldn't avoid feeling the stares. The couple now behind her spoke in hushed but audible tones. "How does someone like—" "You know," the woman whispered. Indigo felt the muscles in her back tense. She held her head high and handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who scanned it without comment. She stepped onto the jet bridge, a wave of stale, conditioned air greeting her as she moved forward. She told herself, "Focus on the job interview. Don't let them ruin your day." Once inside the plane, Indigo found her seat in the first-class cabin, seat 2A, a window seat. She settled her carry-on in the overhead compartment and sat down, taking in the luxury of the wide seat extra legroom and an adjustable headrest. She couldn't help but smile at having a bit of comfort for the 4-hour flight ahead. As other first-class passengers boarded, Indigo tried not to stare, but she couldn't help noticing the sideways glances and slight double takes. The tension in the air felt palpable, as if people were asking themselves, shouldn't she be in economy? A flight attendant with a tight bun of blonde hair offered Indigo a welcome drink. Her name tag read Harriet. Indigo tried to accept with her usual polite smile, but Harriet's eyes flicked over Indigo with a near imperceptible sarcasm. She placed a glass of orange juice on Indigo's tray, with what Indigo swore was deliberate roughness. The juice nearly sloshed out of the cup. Indigo inhaled, deciding not to read too deeply into it, and thanked Harriet with a calm voice. "It's going to be a long flight," Indigo told herself, sipping her juice. Moments later, the same middle-aged couple from the gate boarded. They had seats across the aisle in 2C and 2D. The man sat near the window, and the woman, dressed in a crisp beige suit, settled in the aisle seat. She placed her designer handbag under the seat in front of her, eyeing Indigo with faint disbelief. Indigo pretended not to notice, focusing instead on adjusting the seat's recline features to get comfortable. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Indigo flicked through the in-flight entertainment system. The safety demonstration played on the screens, accompanied by the usual instructions: fasten seat belts, note the emergency exits, etc. Harriet and another flight attendant walked through the aisle, making final checks. Indigo noticed Harriet giving her a once-over again, with a look that felt borderline contemptuous. The plane roared down the runway and lifted into the sky. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and Harriet returned to distribute hot towels and take meal orders. Indigo requested the vegetable frittata. The middle-aged couple across the aisle asked for 2 omelets. Indigo tried to immerse herself in a documentary about African safaris, but Harriet's presence loomed. The flight attendant walked up and down the aisle, refilling drinks for the other first-class passengers. Indigo kept waiting for her to come back around. Her own glass was empty. After half an hour, Indigo gently pressed the call button. Harriet approached, her eyes narrowed. "Yes," she asked curtly. Indigo forced a polite smile. "Could I get a water refill?" Harriet sighed. "We're quite busy," she said, though the first-class cabin had only a handful of people. "I'll get to it soon." Indigo felt heat rush to her face. She glanced around, noticing that Harriet had no problem catering to the other passengers' requests. Still, Indigo spoke softly, not wanting to escalate anything. "Thank you," she said. Time dragged on. 15 minutes later, Indigo still had no water. She tried to keep her composure, shifting her focus to the documentary, but the tension swelled in her chest. Finally, Harriet reappeared with a bottle, plunking it on Indigo's tray table without a word. No smile, no courtesy. Just turned on her heel and left. Indigo's frustration grew. She'd encountered small acts of discrimination before, but rarely did they feel this blatant and unmasked. About an hour into the flight, breakfast was served. Indigo turned off her monitor, ready to eat. Harriet handed the vegetable frittata to Indigo with a muted scowl. Indigo tried to ignore it. She focused on the food, which was surprisingly decent for airline fare. The quiet was soon shattered by a comment from the middle-aged woman across the aisle. She had turned in her seat to speak to another passenger behind them, apparently unaware Indigo could hear. "That seat should have gone to someone who knows how to act." She said, her voice raised enough to carry forward. "I swear it's wasted sometimes." Indigo's stomach lurched. She had no doubt who they were talking about. She struggled to maintain a calm exterior as she ate her meal, though each bite seemed to stick in her throat. Deciding it was best to avoid confrontation, Indigo put on her headphones and tried to disappear into her entertainment system. Shortly after, Harriet started collecting trays. She hovered by Indigo's seat longer than necessary, as if searching for something to criticize. Indigo handed over her tray politely, thanking Harriet, but Harriet responded only with a perfunctory nod before moving on. By now, Indigo was past the point of giving Harriet the benefit of the doubt. It was too consistent, too targeted, and the stares, the whispers, they were relentless. Indigo's mind whirled. Should I say something? Should I call Harriet out? Should I ask for a manager? Memories of past experiences flooded her mind. She thought about the time a co-worker once told her she spoke so well for someone from a rough Atlanta neighborhood, though Indigo had grown up in a safe middle-class area. Then there was that look of shock on people's faces when they realized Indigo was valedictorian of her undergraduate class. She was exhausted by having to prove herself at every turn. Despite the anger building inside, Indigo decided to keep calm and document everything. She opened the Notes app on her phone and typed a summary of Harriet's behavior, the murmurs from other passengers. She noted the time, seat numbers, everything. If something else happens, she thought, I'll have a record. Just as Indigo considered how to handle the situation, the woman across the aisle stood up to grab something from the overhead bin. In doing so, she dropped her phone on Indigo's armrest. Indigo gently picked it up to hand it back, trying to be helpful. "Here you go, Mom," Indigo said with a polite smile. The woman sneered. "Don't touch my phone." Indigo blinked. "I'm sorry, I was just—" "Don't apologize," the woman snapped, snatching the phone from Indigo's hand. She spoke in a tone that made Indigo's skin crawl, the sort of tone one uses on a misbehaving child. "You'd better watch yourself." Immediately, Indigo felt an electric pulse of indignation. She glanced around. Other first-class passengers were watching the scene with a mix of fascination and discomfort. Some turned away, not wanting to get involved. Indigo took a deep breath. Her mother's words from long ago echoed in her mind. Pick your battles wisely, Indigo. But how many times had Indigo stayed silent, letting these small injustices pass? Quietly, Indigo said. "There's no need for that tone." The woman scoffed. "Tone? I don't know what you're implying." Still speaking calmly, Indigo replied, "I'm just saying I was trying to be polite. No harm was meant." Before the woman could retort, Harriet bustled over. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, looking straight at Indigo, not the other woman. Indigo blinked in disbelief. "No problem, Harriet. Just a misunderstanding." The passenger dropped her phone. "I picked it up." The woman interrupted. She grabbed my phone and wouldn't let it go. Indigo's mouth fell open. "What? That's not what happened." Harriet's gaze hardened at Indigo, ignoring Indigo's protest. "Ma'am, we ask that you respect other passengers' belongings. I'll have to ask you to remain calm for the rest of the flight." A wave of helpless fury crashed over Indigo. She struggled to keep her voice steady. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just returning her phone." But Harriet simply pursed her lips. "I don't want any more trouble," she warned, pointing a finger at Indigo's face in a way that set Indigo's nerves alight. "If you can't follow instructions, we might have to involve security upon landing." A pregnant silence fell over the cabin. Indigo felt a hot flush creep up her neck. She had rarely felt so blatantly patronized, so disrespected. She opened her mouth to argue, but the moment she did, the woman rolled her eyes dramatically, as if Indigo were being hysterical. Indigo clenched her jaw, tears pricking her eyes. She turned forward, deciding it was best to remain silent rather than escalate. Harriet and the woman shared a look of satisfaction before Harriet walked off. Indigo could almost taste the tension suffocating as the recycled cabin air. 10 minutes later, Indigo felt a light tap on her shoulder. She removed her headphones to see a fellow first-class passenger leaning over the aisle, a man with salt and pepper hair wearing a casual blazer. "Excuse me," he whispered. "I saw the whole thing. I just want you to know, if you need a witness, I'll vouch for you." That was ridiculous. Indigo felt a rush of relief, tears threatening to spill. "Thank you," she whispered back. "I really appreciate that. May I ask your name?" "Sure. I'm Robert." "Robert Mills," the man replied. "I'm sorry you have to deal with this." Indigo nodded her gratitude, pressing her lips together. She felt slightly steadier, knowing someone else had seen the truth. Another wave of determination rose within her. She wasn't crazy, and she wasn't alone in perceiving the hostility. She tried to return to her documentary, though the heartbreak lingered. The flight droned on. As they began their descent into Los Angeles, Harriet made her final pass through the cabin, collecting trash and ensuring seats were in the upright position. She paused by Indigo's row. Indigo noticed Harriet's features were tight, as though she was bracing for Indigo to say something. When Indigo gave no indication of wanting to talk, Harriet moved on, but not before a final disapproving glare. Indigo stared out the window at the sprawling city below, dotted with buildings glinting in the California sun. Normally, this view excited her, the promise of new opportunities. But now, Indigo's thoughts were overshadowed by dread, uncertain if Harriet or the woman across the aisle would stir up more trouble after the plane landed. Sure enough, as soon as the seatbelt sign turned off and the aircraft began to taxi, Harriet stepped into the aisle and spoke with the authority of someone making an official announcement. "Indigo Williams," Harriet said loud enough for all of first class to hear. "I'll need you to remain seated until all other passengers have deplaned. We'll be having a word with security." Indigo felt her heart plummet to the soles of her feet. "What did I do?" she asked, genuinely shocked. Harriet's lips pressed into a thin line. "There's been a complaint about disruptive behavior," she said, then turned her gaze to the woman across the aisle, who wore a self-satisfied smirk. I didn't do anything," Indigo protested, her voice breaking slightly. The other passengers glanced at each other uneasily, some averting their eyes. Nobody spoke up at that moment, except Robert. Standing up from his seat in 3C, he turned to Harriet. "This is unbelievable. I saw everything. The only disruptive behavior came from that woman there." He jabbed a thumb at the woman in the beige suit, who glowered back at him. "That's enough," Sir Harriet snapped. "We will handle this matter." Indigo sank back into her seat, disbelief tingling in her limbs. She felt as though she were trapped in a bizarre nightmare. The plane docked at the gate, and people began collecting their belongings. Indigo watched them go, tears of humiliation welling in her eyes as each passenger passed by. A few seemed sympathetic, but fear or discomfort kept them silent. When the cabin was empty except for Indigo, Harriet, and a uniformed ground staff member, Indigo stood up, retrieving her carry-on from the overhead bin with trembling hands. She followed Harriet down the jet bridge, her legs feeling like lead. Robert had waited too, ignoring Harriet's instructions to leave. Indigo was grateful for his support. At the end of the jet bridge, a couple of airport security officers stood waiting. The woman in the beige suit and her husband lingered nearby, arms folded. The woman pointed at Indigo, launching into a tirade. "That's her. She was aggressive on the flight, tried to grab my phone, threatened me." Indigo's eyes widened. She looked to Harriet. "That's a lie. I never threatened her." Harriet chimed in. "I can't say for sure about threats, but I did see Indigo acting aggressive when I approached. She refused to follow flight crew instructions." Robert stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. I witnessed the entire thing." Indigo did nothing wrong. The phone fell on her armrest, and she was returning it. The security officers looked at Robert, then at Indigo, then at Harriet and the middle-aged couple. Their faces were unreadable, locked in professional neutrality. One of the officers asked Indigo for her ID. Indigo handed it over her hand, shaking slightly. In the swirl of tension, Indigo's phone buzzed in her bag. She ignored it, focusing instead on explaining her side of the story. She spoke steadily, fighting the tears that threatened to betray her composure. Robert corroborated her account in detail. After several tense minutes of cross-talk, one of the officers called Harriet aside to ask more questions. Finally, the security officer returned Indigo's ID. "It appears this was a misunderstanding," he said. "No charges, no further action. You're both free to go. But I suggest you all calm down next time. We can't have these issues in the air." Indigo let out a shaky sigh. Relief mingled with anger. She wanted an apology from Harriet, from the woman in the beige suit, but she knew she'd get none. The woman glared at Indigo, turned on her heel, and left with her husband. Harriet didn't look Indigo in the eye as she walked away. Robert patted Indigo's shoulder sympathetically. "I'm sorry you went through this. I wish I could do more." Indigo mustered a thin smile. "You've done plenty." "Thank you." With that, Robert left to catch his connecting flight. Indigo was left alone, battered, but free of immediate accusations in an airport hallway, thrumming with travelers, oblivious to what had just transpired. She glanced at her phone to see what had caused it to buzz 3 missed calls from her mother, and a text message. "Hey sweetie, just checking you're safe. Let me know you landed." Indigo typed back a quick response, her fingers still trembling. "I'm okay, Mum. Just a little shaken. I'll call you soon." She took a moment, leaning against the cool metal wall, trying to steady her breathing. The job interview was in 2 days, and she had planned to spend that time exploring LA. Now she felt drained. Part of her considered letting it go, but she knew this was bigger than just her. She remembered her notes, the typed-out bullet points of Harriet's actions. She had a paper trail, plus a potential witness in Robert. Should I report Harriet to Delta? Indigo wondered, scrolling for Delta's customer service line. I have to do something. Then she remembered. She had Harriet's name and flight number, and she had social media. Once Indigo settled into her hotel room in downtown Los Angeles. She composed herself and called her mother, recounting the incident with Harriet and the rude passenger. Her mother was livid, urging Indigo to file a complaint. Indigo promised she would. After the call, Indigo slumped down on the bed. She was too exhausted to do much else, but her frustration kept her awake. She opened Twitter, typed out a thread detailing the entire ordeal, from start to finish, tagging her at Delta, describing Harriet's behavior and the false accusations. She also posted pictures of her torn boarding pass, the seat number, and a screenshot of her notes app. She concluded with, I only wanted to fly in peace. Instead, I was treated like a criminal for existing in first class. This can't be acceptable. #flying while black. #racism. The skies, Delta Indigo, hesitated for a moment before hitting tweet. She wasn't the type to stir public drama, but she felt this needed to be heard. Then she set her phone aside, took a shower, and tried to rest. In the morning, Indigo opened her Twitter notifications to see hundreds of likes, retweets, and comments. Some were supportive, empathizing with her experience. Others were skeptical or outright hateful. But Indigo noticed a pattern. Many other black travelers shared stories of being questioned about why they were in certain cabins or how they could afford their tickets. It became clear that Indigo's experience resonated with many. Her phone rang an unknown number. Indigo usually let those go to voicemail, but instinct nudged her to answer. On the line was someone from Delta's customer relations department. The woman introduced herself as Kelly, apologized on behalf of the airline, and asked Indigo for a detailed statement of what happened. Indigo recounted the incident once more, feeling a bit of hope. Kelly assured her that Delta was taking the matter seriously, that they would investigate Harriet's conduct, and that Indigo would hear back soon. Over the next 24 hours, Indigo's tweets continued to gain traction. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as another instance of potential discrimination on a major airline. Some activists on social media called for Harriet's suspension, while others demanded Indigo be compensated or offered an official apology. Indigo's phone kept lighting up with interview requests from small digital news sites, but Indigo also received hateful messages, some telling her to stop playing the race card, others claiming she was lying for attention. Indigo tried not to let those messages get under her skin, but it wasn't easy. Meanwhile, Indigo prepared for her interview. Printing out resumes, revisiting her portfolio, practicing potential answers. She tried to keep her focus on the opportunity that had brought her to LA in the first place, but with her phone buzzing constantly and her story exploding online, it was a challenge. She found herself toggling between practicing a pitch about why she was an ideal candidate and reading the newest wave of support or scorn on social media. The day of her interview arrived. Indigo, dressed in a smart navy blue suit, took a ride-share to the tech startup's office and tried to set her personal turmoil aside. The interview went well, at least Indigo thought so. She left feeling optimistic about her prospects, but was still overshadowed by the ongoing storm with the airline. It was the evening after her interview, and Indigo was scrolling through emails on her laptop in the hotel lobby when her phone rang again from an unknown number. Rolling her eyes at the prospect of another spam call, Indigo answered. "Hello, is this Indigo Williams?" A poised female voice asked. "Yes, this is she," Indigo said cautiously. "This is Joanne Smith," said the voice. "I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer here at Delta Airlines. I wanted to speak with you personally about the incident on Flight 2786 from Atlanta to Los Angeles. Do you have a few minutes?" Indigo's pulse quickened. She recognized the name. Joanne Smith was a high-ranking leader at Delta, someone just below the CEO in the chain of command. Indigo had never expected to get such a direct call, especially from a woman of that stature. She stood from her seat in the lobby, moving to a quieter corner. "Yes, of course. Thank you for reaching out." For the next 20 minutes, Joanne Smith listened intently as Indigo described every detail of her experience. Indigo's voice shook at times, but she pressed on, talking about how Harriet had singled her out, how the other passenger had blatantly lied, and how Indigo felt humiliated, threatened, and devalued. When Indigo finished, Joanne sighed. "I want to extend my personal apology," she said. "We pride ourselves on creating a comfortable travel experience for all our customers. What you described is unacceptable. I'd like to assure you we're conducting a thorough investigation. We've spoken to staff, including Harriet, and we have your complaint on file. We're also grateful for the witness who corroborated your account." Indigo felt both relief and lingering wariness. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I just hope something is actually done about it. I don't want this to happen to anyone else." Joanne's tone was firm. "I understand completely. We're reviewing Harriet's conduct. If we find evidence of misconduct, and it seems we might, there will be consequences. Additionally, we'd like to offer you compensation for this distress. We're looking at giving you a voucher for future flights, as well as a personal invitation to speak with our in-house diversity and inclusion team. We'd like to hear your perspective on how we can improve training and awareness for our cabin crew." Indigo was momentarily speechless. She had expected perhaps an apology, maybe a small voucher, but not an active invitation to collaborate on training efforts. "I'm honored you're taking this so seriously," she said. "I'm open to having that conversation." Joanne paused. "Also, our CEO, Ed Bastian, has heard about this. He's equally concerned and asked me to relay our apologies directly. He may wish to speak to you personally, if you're comfortable with that." Indigo swallowed. She'd never imagined she'd get a call from someone so high up at the airline, let alone the CEO. "Of course. Thank you." They ended the call with a promise to reconnect within the week. Indigo sank into a nearby armchair, a swirl of emotions inside her. She felt vindicated in a way that Delta's leadership had taken notice. Yet she also felt wary, wondering if this was just a PR move. She decided she would remain cautious, but also that she would accept any opportunity to make meaningful change. Word of Indigo's conversation with Delta's leadership hit social media when Indigo posted a short update. "Spoke with Delta exec. They're taking action. Thanks for all the support." Suddenly, Indigo's story garnered another wave of attention. Some praised Delta for taking swift action. Others remained skeptical, believing the airline was just protecting its brand. Interviews poured in. Indigo gave a handful of them recounting her story for local stations, and a couple of national morning shows that hopped on the viral news. In one interview, Indigo mentioned Harriet by name, which triggered a flurry of debate online. Some people insisted Harriet should be fired immediately. Others, presumably Harriet's acquaintances or people who disliked Indigo's stance, hurled insults at Indigo, calling her an attention seeker, even claiming Indigo was making the story up for fame. Meanwhile, Indigo discovered a few twisty developments. A black flight attendant from Delta messaged Indigo privately explaining that Harriet was known among colleagues for having certain biases. Indigo realized Harriet's behavior might be part of a pattern that had gone unchecked. Another twist came from Robert Mills, the passenger who defended Indigo. He posted his own account online confirming Indigo's story down to the last detail. Indigo felt a surge of gratitude toward him. As the investigation deepened, Indigo learned that Harriet had been temporarily suspended pending a review. Unbeknownst to Indigo, Harriet had apparently tried to defend herself by stating Indigo was the aggressor, claiming Indigo threatened to sue the airline mid-flight. However, Harriet's claims unraveled when other flight attendants on board testified that Indigo was polite and calm, if visibly upset by Harriet's demeanor. Also, Robert's witness statement contradicted Harriet's version of events. The woman in the beige suit, identified as Mrs. Patricia Graham, had also lodged a complaint against Indigo. But her accusations fell apart under scrutiny. Robert's testimony and Indigo's notes, along with Harriet's own contradictory statements, painted a clear picture of the truth. Eventually, Patricia Graham's complaint was dismissed. Indigo later found out that Patricia Graham's husband was a mid-level executive at a finance firm that publicly stated it does not tolerate discrimination. News of Patricia's role in Indigo's incident circulated, leading to online calls for her to face repercussions. At least one insider rumor suggested Patricia's husband was reprimanded at work after the fiasco tainted his professional reputation. The tension around Indigo's story turned into a cautionary tale about the consequences of open racism. 3 days after Indigo's call with Delta's executive vice president, just as the noise around her viral story began to feel overwhelming, her phone rang again. She was lounging in the quiet nook of her hotel's lounge area, trying to decompress by scrolling through a few articles about workplace culture, when the screen lit up with another unknown number. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was another media inquiry or perhaps a spam call, but something told her to pick up. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Hello, is this Indigo?" "Williams?" came a familiar, composed male voice. "Yes, this is she. This is Ed Bastian, CEO of Delta Airlines." Indigo sat upright. Her heart jumped into her throat. She had heard his voice in videos before, calm, calculated, always speaking on behalf of a brand that represented professionalism and progress. But she never imagined she'd be on the receiving end of that voice, let alone in the middle of a national controversy. "Mr. Bastian, thank you for calling," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "I wanted to speak with you personally, Indigo," he said, his tone direct yet sincere. "What you went through on Flight 2786 was unacceptable, and on behalf of Delta, I want to offer you my deepest apologies." Indigo swallowed hard. She was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. "Thank you," she finally replied. "It's been a lot." "I understand," he said. "And I want you to know we're taking this seriously, not just because it went viral, but because it reflects a deeper issue that we must confront. This isn't the standard we strive for." He paused before continuing. "I've reviewed the incident. I've spoken with the team, read your complaint, and reviewed the witness accounts. What you experienced from the initial tension to the false accusation should never happen on our flights. Or anywhere." Indigo took a breath, appreciating the gravity in his tone. "I'm grateful to hear that. I just hope this isn't a PR patch. People like Harriet, people who carry that quiet contempt, don't just disappear after one news cycle." "You're absolutely right," Ed said. which is why we're not just issuing apologies. We've already begun implementing structural responses. Harriet has been placed on administrative leave, and our internal investigation is concluding soon. But more than that, we're launching a new round of crew training with a stronger focus on unconscious bias and equitable treatment. And we want your voice in that. Indigo blinked. My voice. We'd like to invite you to speak with our diversity and inclusion team in person. Share your experience. Help us shape a training program that reflects reality, not theory. We believe your perspective can guide real improvement. She was stunned. She had expected a small voucher, maybe a form letter. But here was the CEO of one of the largest airlines in the world, not only acknowledging her trauma, but inviting her to become part of the solution. I would be honored, Indigo said, slowly, her voice cracking just slightly. That means a lot. There's more, Ed added. We've decided to issue a formal travel credit as compensation for the distress you endured, and this part is close to my heart. We're launching a scholarship in your name. It'll support young black students from Atlanta interested in aviation business or public service. Indigo covered her mouth, shocked. Wait, seriously? Yes. It's a small start, but it's something tangible, he said. We're calling it the Indigo Williams Flight Forward Scholarship. We hope it will inspire future leaders who look like you to take up space and thrive. For a moment, Indigo didn't know what to say. Her heart swelled with a mixture of humility and disbelief. The woman who had been humiliated mid-air was now having her name etched into a program that could change lives. Mr. Bastian, I'm speechless. Thank you. Truly, she said. No, he replied. Thank you for not staying silent, for documenting everything, for forcing us to be better. They spoke for a few more minutes, wrapping the call with a promise to meet at Delta headquarters the following month. As she hung up, Indigo placed her phone on the table, staring out the hotel window. The same woman who had been told to remain seated for security just days ago was now being asked to help reform the airline from the inside. She thought of her mother, of Robert Mills, of every passenger who had stayed silent, and every stranger online who had amplified her voice when it trembled. All of it had led to this moment. Indigo closed her eyes and whispered to herself, You turned turbulence into testimony. This was no longer just about a flight. It was about what came after the legacy, the message and the movement that would continue long after the seatbelt signs turned off. Returning to Atlanta felt like coming back from war. The skies had been calm on the flight home, but Indigo's heart was anything but. Delta had upgraded her to first class, no extra charge, no questions asked. The attendants on this flight were almost overly attentive, their smiles polite and their tone warm, even reverent. Indigo could tell there was a note attached to her passenger file. Every interaction was handled with careful kindness, the kind reserved for someone who had unexpectedly become a public figure. She reclined in her seat and stared out the window, watching clouds drift by, like soft curtains in the sky. A small part of her appreciated the courtesy, but another part found it bitter. It shouldn't take going viral to be treated like a person, and yet here she was, finally seen, finally heard, because the world had watched her humiliation unfold in real time. When she landed at Hartsfield-Jackson, the flash of cameras greeted her near baggage claim. Local reporters had somehow gotten her arrival time. A few called out her name, asking for a statement. Indigo kept walking, polite but firm. No comment right now, she said. She didn't owe anyone a sound bite. Not today. Her mother, Michelle, was waiting just outside the terminal doors. The moment Indigo stepped into her arms, the tension dissolved, if only for a moment. "You're safe," Michelle whispered, holding her close. "That's all I care about." Back home, Indigo allowed herself a deep exhale. Her room was exactly as she had left it, walls covered with framed degrees, shelves lined with books and photos from her undergrad years, and a corkboard dotted with sticky notes of her goals. She sat on the edge of her bed, exhausted, but finally grounded. The very next morning, an email lit up her inbox. The subject line made her breath catch. Job offer. "Welcome to the team." It was official. The LA tech startup had extended an offer with a generous salary, full relocation package, and signing bonus. Her heart skipped. She had done it, despite everything, despite the discrimination, the trauma, the exhausting spotlight. She had secured the role she'd worked so hard for. She ran downstairs, phone in hand, yelling, "Mama, I got it!" Michelle turned from the kitchen sink, eyes already misting. "I knew you would, baby," she said, voice trembling. "You fought through everything, and look, you made it." The following days were a whirlwind of preparations, apartment hunting, moving quotes, paperwork. Indigo's phone remained constantly buzzing, not just from work or friends, but from Delta's corporate team as well. True to their word, they invited her to speak with their internal diversity and inclusion team. Indigo hesitated at first. Would it be genuine or just a performance for optics? But after some thought, she accepted. If there was a chance to make real change, to use her voice for more than catharsis for impact, she had to try. At the Delta corporate office, Indigo was greeted respectfully. The team listened. They didn't interrupt. She spoke honestly about the subtle and overt ways bias had shown up in her flight experience and in so many others' lives. She talked about the trauma of always having to document, to anticipate being disbelieved. She shared ideas on improving sensitivity training, including testimonials and implicit bias workshops that didn't rely on outdated role-play exercises. The head of the department took notes. Another executive nodded throughout her entire presentation. At the end, one of the team members, a black woman in HR, pulled Indigo aside. "I've been trying to push for reform here for years," she said. "Your voice, it moved the needle in a way mine couldn't. Thank you for shaking things up." Indigo left that day, feeling cautiously hopeful. She wasn't naive. She knew systems didn't change overnight. But she also knew a door had been cracked open, and she had helped pry it loose. News about Harriet's fate trickled in soon after. Indigo learned that the flight attendant had refused to accept responsibility, standing by her narrative, even after passenger testimonies and staff interviews disproved her claims. Delta eventually terminated Harriet's employment. The official statement cited a failure to uphold professional standards and customer service ethics. Indigo had mixed emotions. She didn't celebrate Harriet's firing, but she didn't mourn it either. Actions had consequences. Harriet had made a choice not just to mistreat Indigo, but to double down on her behavior instead of reflecting. If accountability meant preventing another passenger from enduring what Indigo did, then it was necessary. In the weeks that followed, Indigo began receiving new kinds of messages, not from reporters or executives, but from ordinary people. "Your story helped me speak up at my job. I cried watching your interview. Thank you for your strength. I travel a lot for work, and I've felt that same sting. Thank you for putting it into words." Each message reminded her that what she endured hadn't been in vain. And as Indigo packed the last of her boxes for Los Angeles, she felt it something new, something powerful. Not just victory, legacy. As Indigo settled into the rhythm of her relocation, Los Angeles became more than just a city. It became a symbol of renewal. Her days were filled with planning the move, packing memories into boxes, and preparing for a new professional chapter that once felt out of reach. Amid the whirlwind of logistics, Indigo noticed something else quietly building. People were still talking. Her story hadn't faded from public memory. It had ignited something larger. The offers began trickling in almost immediately. Invitations from diversity panels, requests to speak at inclusion forums, and messages from college students who had seen her on the news flooded her inbox. Many shared their own painful experiences, being questioned at airports, followed in stores, spoken to with condescension masked as politeness. Indigo was moved. Each message was a thread in a tapestry she hadn't realized she was weaving. Though she was never one to seek the spotlight, Indigo knew her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been made to feel like an intruder in spaces they had every right to occupy. So when a local university invited her to speak to a group of business students about resilience and advocacy, she said yes. Standing at the front of that lecture hall days before her move, Indigo wore a soft grey dress and low heels. Her voice, though steady, carried the emotional weight of every moment she recounted Harriet's contempt. Patricia Graham's humiliation, the silent stares of her fellow passengers. But she didn't linger in the pain. Instead, she turned toward empowerment. If your presence makes others uncomfortable, she told the crowd, don't shrink. Make what? Make room. That discomfort isn't your burden to carry. The room responded with a standing ovation. Afterward, a young black woman approached her with glassy eyes. You don't know what it means to see someone like you standing here, she whispered. Indigo smiled and gently squeezed her hand. Then promise me you'll stand here too one day. Amid all the growth and opportunity, Indigo received news from Delta through informal channels. Harriet had been terminated. The airline had cited unprofessional behavior and conduct unbecoming of their customer service standards. While Indigo never sought to destroy someone's livelihood, she knew this was a necessary step. Harriet had chosen to escalate bias into public harm. Accountability wasn't cruelty, it was justice. As for Patricia Graham, whispers circled online that her husband had faced intense scrutiny at his firm. A reprimand, a quiet reassignment. Though Patricia's apology letter had arrived with carefully chosen language, it did little to undo the public judgment. Indigo didn't reply. Some doors she decided were best left closed. With her relocation only days away, Indigo packed her bags with a sense of closure. The city she was leaving had taught her strength. The city she was headed to promised growth. But no matter where she went, one thing was certain: Indigo had stepped into her power, and she wasn't stepping back. Los Angeles greeted Indigo with a mix of new beginnings and quiet resolve. Her relocation felt less like a move and more like a personal evolution, a shedding of one skin to step into another, stronger one. Her new apartment, a modest one-bedroom nestled in a bustling downtown neighborhood, had sunlight that streamed through tall windows and a balcony that overlooked a row of cafes and bike lanes. It wasn't grand, but it felt like freedom, like peace. The first day at her new job arrived with butterflies in her stomach. Indigo dressed with care, choosing a tailored navy blazer and soft rose blouse. As she stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down her curls, she didn't just see a new hire, she saw a woman who had weathered storms and stood her ground in turbulence, both literal and metaphorical. She smiled softly at her reflection, then whispered, "Let's do this." Her co-workers were welcoming the office culture, laid back but driven. No one knew about the viral flight incident, at least not yet. And Indigo was grateful for the space to simply exist as herself, a talented, capable black woman with something valuable to offer. Her manager praised her portfolio. Her ideas were well received in the first strategy meeting. It felt good to be seen, but more importantly, it felt good not to be questioned. 3 weeks in Indigo found her rhythm. She'd established her morning coffee routine, discovered a quiet lunch spot tucked between 2 flower shops, and even started exploring LA's art districts on the weekends. Still, on quiet evenings, her mind often drifted back to that flight, to Harriet's sneer, to Patricia Graham's scornful tone, to the moment when a stranger named Robert Mills spoke up and changed everything. One afternoon, she stepped out of the office and stood on the sidewalk outside, letting the California sun wash over her skin. The breeze tugged gently at her blouse as she tilted her face to the sky, her eyes closed. That single flight, those hours of humiliation, strength, and eventual vindication, had changed her forever. And oddly enough, it had given her more than it took. Her phone buzzed. A new email. It was from Delta's Diversity and Inclusion team. "We'd be honored to have you speak at our upcoming Equity Summit next month. Your story continues to spark change." Indigo stared at the screen, then slowly typed a response. "Count me in. Let's keep the conversation going." She hit send, her fingers steady, her heart full. This wasn't the end of her story. In many ways, it was just the prologue to a larger narrative. One where she no longer needed to shrink herself to fit into uncomfortable spaces. One where her voice wasn't just heard, but welcomed. As the breeze danced through the LA streets, Indigo made a promise to herself. No matter where life took her next, she would carry her dignity, her courage, and her truth with her. Always. Thank you for joining Indigo on this deeply personal flight of injustice, perseverance, and ultimate triumph. Her experience reminds us that change begins when we speak truth, even if our voice trembles. From a single airline seat to the boardroom of Delta Airlines, Indigo's story illustrates how one moment of courage can lead to a broader conversation about equality and respect. And it's not just about what happened in the sky. It's about realizing that we each have the power to challenge prejudice wherever it appears. If Indigo's journey moved you, enlightened you, or inspired you, please show your support. Like this video, share it with friends who need to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that spotlight both the hardships and the hope in our world. Together, let's keep soaring higher, guided by empathy and understanding.